The 2023-2024 NBA season has been riddled with constantly changing narratives, stories, and weird scenarios across the whole league. From superstar trades at the start of the season to a lackluster trade deadline and all time greats not being in the playoffs. So much has happened this season, and honestly, I just want to look at what I expect to happen for the rest of the season following the All-Star break, headed towards the playoffs, and really, as the season ends up winding down, as we get closer and closer to crowning the next, or maybe repeat, NBA champion.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry! With 0.6 of a second remaining.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Game Time. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to jump right into things here today. So first off, before we get to the basketball and everything like that, I do want to say if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy. It's much appreciated. If you guys are returning, it has been quite a while since we have posted an episode here on the channel, and today's episode is going to be a little different. Now, the last time I posted was all the way back at the start of November. It is almost March now, so I definitely took a little bit of a hiatus. If you guys were wondering where I was, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. I was fine. I wasn't posting. I was just enjoying basketball, and honestly, there was a little bit of a break in the season where I wasn't as in tune as I normally am with basketball, and to come on the internet and make videos deep diving into certain players and to certain plays, certain teams. Obviously, I kept up very well with my own team in the Denver Nuggets, but as for a complete total league sense, really, there was a couple weeks there where I kind of stepped away and wasn't as focused in on it, and then I focused back in on it. Then I don't want to make the videos, and I'm got school, then I got work, then I'm over break, all sorts of stuff, right? If you guys don't know, the channel was named NBA Now, so you guys may kind of see the similar thumbnail, click on it, and be like, oh, wait, I know this guy, but this is a different channel name. So I did rebrand the channel when I went on the hiatus, and yeah, we're back, different name, same style of content. Today will be a little bit different because obviously it's been a while, and so it's going to be a little bit more podcasty today, honestly. Normally, like I said, we kind of dive into one team, one player, an award race, whatever it is for that video, and we really hone in on that and kind of the thoughts and everything going on around that. Certain statistics we bring up a lot more. I'm sure I'll bring up some today. But yeah, for the most part, I want to look at some of my predictions going towards the end of the season, whether it's teams at the top of the standings, teams fighting to get into the playoffs or the play-in, or teams that are looking towards a top draft pick in next year's draft to go get one of the better players in what currently is projected to be a little bit of a weaker draft than we've seen in recent memory. Now, the last time we talk about a recent draft that was weaker, well, you got Anthony Edwards that came out of it as the number one overall pick and is now leading his team to one of the best records in the NBA. So, how much we can really call the draft a weaker draft this far out is yet to be said. But there isn't a Victor Wembanyama, although there's kind of there is kind of in Alexander Sarr. But yeah, there isn't a LeBron James in this class. Nobody's saying that as of now. Now we'll see what happens as things go along with the draft process, after the draft, etc., where we look back on the draft, whatever. It's a little bit hard to tell on the draft at this point, but for the most part, people are calling it a weaker draft. Now, again, we're going to be a little bit sporadic today, little podcasty. First off, though, since we're coming out of All-Star break, since we're really heading into the last quarter of the season, which is something I don't think a lot of people actually think about, because typically you look at All-Star break and it's like, oh, it's like the midway points after the trade deadline, halfway through the season. No, I mean, we're almost at 60 games played for most teams in the NBA. And, the first team we'll talk about once I finish talking about my thoughts on All-Star are the Boston Celtics, because we're going to start in the Eastern Conference, work our way to the West. Obviously, the Nuggets are my favorite team, so I don't want to start with them and ramble for 40 minutes on them and just forget to talk about the rest of the league, which I actually have a lot of thoughts on. So the Boston Celtics, they have 44 wins, 12 losses. Well, you add that together, that's 56 games out of 82, which is well over half, right? I mean, they've already won more than half the games that they could play in the season, which they are the only team to do that to this point. And we'll get to that here in a minute. But first, I want to talk about All-Star break, All-Star weekend, the All-Star game, the whole shebang. Now, over the past few years, personally, I haven't really tuned into All-Star that much. The last time I really tuned into All-Star was a game that I really, really enjoyed and loved watching. So I actually wasn't at home. I was dog sitting, I was house sitting. It was back when, and I can't remember the exact game. I want to say it was like 2020 or 2019. And it was the infamous game where Kyle Lowry was drawing charges, brings it down, everybody starts playing good defense. It's the first year of the elim ending being added in, so you score, if you score 50 in the first half, then you got to score 50 in the second half plus 24, so therefore 74 in the second half. First team to get to that score wins the game, right? That was the first year that we saw the elim ending get added in, and man, that game was fun. I was house sitting. I remember I'd brought my PlayStation over and I was on the game with the boys, and literally, I think, I was kind of in and out of watching in the first half, but it was a relatively competitive game. I mean, especially considering it was an all-star game. And I remember coming out of the second half, there was just something about the game where it was like pretty competitive, where I was like, I think I might have been playing Rainbow Six Siege at the time, and um, which honestly is one of my favorite games of all time. Just got to put that out there. But if not my favorite. But yeah, I think I might have been playing Rainbow or Fortnite at the time, and I remember like saying to the guys like, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna go get food or whatever." And I think I went and made food or something like that after the fact. But I literally went and sat down and just fucking watched the rest of the game. Like I just watched the second half of the game. Which yeah, obviously, like I'm a huge basketball fan, so that's not a crazy thing. I mean, I literally sit here and make videos about how much I like basketball and certain things and certain aspects and players in basketball. So that's not the craziest thing to just like dip out on the boys while you were playing the game. But what was crazy for me was to do it for an All Star game, something that I hadn't tuned into really religiously prior to that, because the game wasn't that well. It wasn't a great product that was put out there. And then following that, I was really into the draft. I really liked them bringing in the draft. They did get rid of that this year in the elim ending, so they brought it back to East versus West, and um, just a traditional game, if you want to call it that. I don't know how many traditional games you see 211 points in, but we'll get to the actual game here in a minute this weekend. I do want to tangent on that and just talk about the positives for this weekend. So obviously, I loved that game a few years ago. Can't say the same about this game. Now, I didn't catch, honestly, the last couple of years, haven't really watched it live. That was the last game where I remember truly sitting there and locking in and just enjoying the All Star game for what it was, which was true superstar players playing and it being a very competitive game with Giannis on one side, LeBron on the other side, all sorts of shit going on, right? And so that was a fun game for me to watch. Whereas like this weekend, my takeaway was not the All Star game for positives. The continued, and I think biggest draw to the All Star event, All Star weekend now for the NBA, not the slam dunk contest, not the actual game, but the 3-point contest. Really over the last probably 5 to 6 years has kind of become the premier event for All Star weekend. And they did something different this year where they obviously had the separate 3-point contest. You have Damian Lillard win that, I want to say with a score of 26. Then you do the Sabrina and Steph thing, and I can't remember if they did it before or after because I didn't watch it live. I did go back and watch the entirety of Dame's shooting, the entirety of Sabrina's and Steph's. I think I can't remember if I watched Cats or if I just saw the moment where like he was standing on the 2-point line, whatever. And it got counted as a three in the 3-point contest, which I thought was funny. Um, but yeah, so I went back and I watched those three, like the winners, and then obviously the Sabrina versus Steph. And man, when you like, I knew Steph Curry was winning, or I knew that he won it, right? And I still went in and I watched Sabrina and I go, shit, she just put up as much as the guy that just won the contest, or they won. I don't know the order of how they did that. I assume Sabrina and Steph were after. Um, but so she just put up as much as Damian Lillard, right? Which I knew at this point, and then Steph outdoes it, and you're watching it, and you're like, "Oh shoot, I don't know if he's gonna do it," and he does it, and it's like this was a moment where, like, obviously we all know he's the greatest shooter of all time. Obviously, he's one of the best players to ever play the game. He's probably the most influential player to ever touch a basketball outside of outside of the man that invented the game. You know what I mean? Um, and so yeah, I mean, it was electric. It was clearly the best event that happened. Personally, I think Steph should have got the 3-point contest award, considering he literally scored more than Damian Lillard and is an NBA player. So I would have gotten if Sabrina didn't get it had she beaten Steph, because she's not even technically in the league. She's in a separate league, though adjacent, and the women's version of it, right? Um, I would get if she didn't necessarily get the 3-point contest award. But I do think Steph should have gotten it, and I don't think it should have been a Damian Lillard back to back. That might be a weirdly somewhat uncontroversial, non-controversial, maybe controversial opinion. I don't know. But yeah, so Steph did exactly what he's done his entire life and just shot the shit out of the basketball and did what he had to do to win. Um, and so that was sick to watch. And then as for the slam dunk contest, prior to it, I loved the fact that Jalen Brown was entering it because when you look at stars that have done it in recent memory, the only All Star that I can think of off the top of the head that I've watched do it in recent memory, right? And we're talking the past 5-ish years, was the Victor Oladipo year, where Victor Oladipo goes on, wins Most Improved Player, plays like a top 15-ish, 20-ish player for the Indiana Pacers, after being moved on from an OKC in the Paul George trade. Him and Sabonis, they go to Indiana. He has an All Star breakout. A couple years later, we see Sabonis follow in his footsteps, also have an All Star breakout, and now or ends up getting moved to the Kings later on, and is now a top 10 MVP candidate. So what talent was on that Thunder roster that was just waiting to arise? And you look at the Thunder now, and it's kind of crazy. Like, holy shit, this team has drafted and traded for so many. Like, there's been so many good players to walk through the Thunder organization over the past decade. And multiple MVPs, a guy that's in multiple guys in MVP race this year, All Stars here and other places for them. Really phenomenal GMing. I don't know how else you can put it other than Sam Presti knows what the fuck he's doing, and if he's not the highest paid GM in basketball, he definitely should be. Um, but yeah, so back to what I was saying. The dunk contest. I was really excited for Jalen Brown to come in to it, and like I said, when we're looking at All Stars that had done it recently, the only guy was Victor Oladipo. He had a good time. That was actually back when around Black Panther released, and so he did the thing where he put the mask on. And I thought I enjoyed what he did at the dunk contest. The only other guy would be Donovan Mitchell, though he did it prior. I want to say he did it his rookie year or his sophomore year, and he was pretty good in the dunk contest. I know I think he had the Vince Carter jersey, and I can't remember all his dunks. That was the same year Larry Nance also recreated his dad's dunk, and we'll talk about recreating dunks here in a minute. But yeah, those are the only real guys other than Jalen Brown to have done it in recent memory. And so I was excited that he was going to go do it. Obviously, you could draw back to Zach LaVine, but that was so long before he was even considered an All Star level player. Even further before like what Donovan Mitchell was considered an All Star player, because that was back when he was still in Minnesota, right? But regardless, that's a tangent that we didn't really necessarily need to go on. So we go to the dunk contest. I'm excited to see Jalen Brown. You bring back Mac McClung out of the G League, which I thought a lot of people had a funny discourse about that I kind of stole. Which was like they really brought him out like a condom for the dunk contest. They used him and then got rid of him once they were done with it, which I do think brought a lot of talk about the bringing in the specialized dunkers and stuff like that. I think Stephen A. In his on his Stephen A. show, he had brought Kenny on. From Now Numbers on the Board, formerly Through the Wire, a guy that I've watched do YouTube for years and years and years, all the way back. I can think probably like fifth grade or something like that, coming home, taking out my math homework that I didn't want to do, and like barely doing that, and drawing my shitty. I just do a plus sign and draw a terrible graph through it, and have his video playing in the background while he's rebuilding the team or whatever. Because you just couldn't get enough of basketball, whether it was 2K, whether it was real basketball, whether I was playing the game, whether I was watching the game. I just couldn't get enough of it, right? Um, and so he's a guy that I respect his opinion, probably just because I've watched him for so long. And I do think he is a relatively um I can't even think of the word, but just a good opinion on basketball, right? And so I was watching the Stephen A. show, or Stephen A. Smith show, where Kenny came on, and he proposed, having the professional dunkers be quote unquote sponsored by star players, so that they're still involved, and it's like the LeBron dunk, but it's like some specialized dunker, and it's like, yeah, you could do that, but like nobody cares. Like, in my opinion, nobody cares about some specialized dunker coming in and doing it. Like, we want to see NBA players do it. And I'm glad Mac McClung was able to show out, and I hope he finds his way to get a spot back on a roster. Obviously, I don't know how many games he's played in his career. He's been initially, I know he was up and down from the G League into the NBA. He was known as like a phenom dunker prior to declaring for the NBA, and now I know I think he's played like all year in the G League for the Magic's G League affiliate this year. If I'm saying that correctly, I know last year it was the Sixers, right? And so, hopefully he finds his way back in, and you hope for that. But it's also like he essentially isn't an NBA player. And then beyond that, you had Jacob Toppin and Jaime Jaquez Jr. And I was excited for Jaquez as well, a guy that was kind of underlooked in the draft. I can't remember the other UCLA player that came out the year prior, and I thought he was going to end up having the same issue where he would go late in the draft and not get a lot of opportunity once it came to the league. No, he goes to Miami, was phenomenal to start the season. Was clear top three rookie of the year candidate up there with Wemby and Chet. Now, since has kind of slid down the boards after hitting a little bit of cold stretch, some other rookies like Brandon Miller really stepping up their game in the last few months. And so you have Jalen Brown, you got a really exciting rookie in there, and a couple other guys, including a guy that won it last year. So it looked to be setting up to be a decent dunk contest. Well, then Jalen Brown gets calls that I don't think, like, he was getting votes for stuff that I just don't think he should have gotten the grades that he did. I mean, you consider the fact that, like Stephen A. Smith said, he jumped over a man that is barely 5 feet tall sitting in a chair. And on the other side, you have guys jumping over Taco Fall and Shaq and clearing them completely. And Jalen Brown almost kicked a 5 foot dude in a chair. Like, I ain't that tall. I'm not that much taller than Kai Cenat. But even then, like, motherfucker, if you're gonna be in the dunk contest, you should be able to easily jump over 6 foot if you're trying to jump over somebody, or don't do that dunk and be more creative. He put a glove on for one, and I thought that was corny because he put it on his left hand, and so I saw a lot of people being like, "Oh, he just did it because everybody makes fun of him for not having a left hand." And it was like, well, that didn't help. Your performance in the dunk contest did not help. Um, Overall, I just didn't like that. It felt like he was getting good votes from the judges just for being a star. And I think when you go to the dunk contest, remove whoever's name it is, whether it's Aaron Gordon, whether it's Jalen Brown, whether it's LeBron James, or whether it's Kai Cenat out there doing a dunk off of a chair. Like, whoever it is out there, you should remove the name when you're scoring it and score the dunk. And I think he was getting scored off of being a star because they wanted him to come back, or they wanted to influence other stars to come because they would get good scores. And that's not how you're going to revive the dunk contest. I do agree with Stephen A. Smith's point that LeBron kind of ruined it, and that might be a different video for a different day. About how you look at stars prior to LeBron entering the league and athletic guys and how often they played in the dunk contest versus now, and after LeBron kind of said that he didn't want to, and the stark shift in talent in the dunk contest from an all-star or superstar caliber type of player, which again I think is a different conversation, maybe for a video on its own. Um, but when we kind of just look at the rest of the dunk contest, you see Mac McClung go on and win it. Again, I didn't really love Jalen Brown saying it wasn't the greatest dunk contest. There were some good dunks in there. I think Jacob Toppin had a really good dunk as well. Um, and yeah, I mean that's the gist of the dunk contest. Was another dud year. I did see Jalen Brown said that like if he got asked to come back, he would. And first off, I'm not against him coming back. I do love the joke of he should be banned forever. But if he comes back and does not have a good dunk, you should immediately eliminate him, and he should have a horrible score and have to deal with not only the embarrassment in the arena, which I'm pretty sure he was getting booed in the arena, but also the embarrassment from his teammates, from the score, and from online. Like, it should all be there if he's not going to show up for it. So, like, if he wants to come and play, I'd love the star talent in it. Show up with some thoughts behind your dunks. Like, you have to be creative. We've seen the dunk contest for 50 years, right? I'm not 50 years old, but it's a thing that has been around for almost generations, you can say at this point. You have to come with creative juices. Worst case scenario, what you do is if you instead of putting professional dunkers in, have professional dunkers come in and work with whoever you have for the dunk contest and give them some ideas to really put together a cool dunk package to display to the people, because putting a glove on is not, or jumping over a short guy is not a cool dunk that should put you in the finals of the NBA dunk contest. It's supposed to be the greatest basketball league on the earth and displaying the best dunkers that we have, and that's what we witnessed. And that's what I think is just a mockery of um, the generations before that came and showed out and put on dunk contests that are still talked about to this day, that happened decades before I was born. Well, maybe not decades, but up to a decade before I was born. And to that, I'm thinking like Dominique Wilkins or an early Michael Jordan or something like that, right? Um, Regardless, like, so many phenomenal players throughout history showed up for that, and it's kind of just become a mockery from a lot of guys. So that's my thoughts on the dunk contest. As for the All Star game, at this point, and I was against this for years, just make the winner of the All Star game get home court advantage in the playoff, or not in the playoffs, in the finals, and bare minimum, the guys on the top teams are gonna compete in it. So Though as a Nuggets fan and how we have pretty good home court advantage, and though the West is phenomenally, I think, more stacked, at least currently with a lot of older All Stars as well in it that want to compete for championships, right? Than the East, who is a much younger conference led by a lot of shaky teams at the top currently. Just implement that because they're not going to play for charity organizations. So if you're going to pay them 500K versus giving the 500K to a charity organization, first off, that's something to be said about the players from a public perspective, which I liked that being brought out from Kenny on the Kenny Beecham show. Um, Again, really respect Kenny. Shout out to Kenny. If you guys don't watch his stuff, make sure you guys do. But yeah, so I like that he brought that up. That like, what's the perspective there? No, if the 500K to every player, if you win it, does something, and they'll actually go out there and just do that instead of the home court advantage. But you could tell Silver was pissed. I think all the fans in the arena were pissed. I think everybody at home was pissed. Sure, you had a couple cool shots from Dame. He recreated the thing over Paul George. Had a couple half quarters. Clearly was going for the MVP. There were a couple other guys like Tyrese going for the MVP. You had guys like Luca and Jokic kind of screwing around. Some of the older guys like LeBron didn't play as much. Makes sense. I mean, but like, and you don't want to get hurt, but I should never see fucking 200 points scored in any sort of NBA related event unless there's 9 point shots. Which I did see Zach Lowe talk about on his podcast, or maybe it wasn't Zach Lowe. It might have been the Thinking Basketball podcast, where it was one of the two. And I apologize for not crediting the idea to the proper place. If it was, both are good podcasts. Kind of insightful in different ways, I guess. But on one of them, they said, okay, well, if you're not gonna like make it competitive, go full gimmicky. Put a 4 point line or a 4 point shot like you do with the Mountain Dew thing. Um, Put a 10 point shot like behind half court if guys are gonna shoot back there. Like you might as well make it a spot that somebody can guard and they know exactly where the 10 point spot is. Like go full gimmicky with it. Use your LED flare if that's what you're gonna do because you know if you're gonna cater it fully towards kids for just a ton of ridiculous scoring stuff, don't treat it like a game. Treat it like a we're gonna have a little All Star event. Or I did see the idea, and this I think was on the Zach Lowe podcast, the Low Post, where I think they said something about like, oh, do essentially 4 games. So this quarter is a game. When it's over, okay, that's the final score there. The second quarter, and you just do four, like it's 4 quarters, right? And you just play different guys for every quarter, or something like that, right? If you expand the roster to 15, then you barely like somebody can play the first and not touch the floor, and maybe play a little bit in the fourth or something like that. Like that's all you got to do. And I'm not necessarily against expanding the roster because you've added I think 4 teams since the last time it expanded, and there are constantly snubs every year. But also, like, I do like the idea of leaving it where it's at and it's still being this prestigious of an accomplishment. Now, the percentage of NBA, I think it's a percentage of NBA players that make an All Star team has gone from like it was like slightly over 5% to now it's like under 3% of players make the All Star team. So you do have to consider that maybe like it is almost twice as hard to make the All Star team now, because you have more teams and like you also have like the coaches vote the benches in and then you have the fan vote where like an Andrew Wiggins makes it because of K-pop, though I think he should have been an all-star, not an all-star starter. It doesn't really matter when you look back on it in grand scheme of things, whether you start or not. It just says one-time all-star. um but I mean, you have all these factors where, like, okay, you're winning, so you get 2 All Stars, but like this guy, like Sabonis, is having an MVP level season. You're gonna put him in top 10 for MVP voting, but he isn't making the All Star game. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be ironed out about the All Star weekend and everything surrounding it. And I'm not the one with all the answers, but I think there are people that have posed a lot of good things that Silver needs to really consider because you can tell he's frustrated. Um, and I don't know. I mean, bring in some of the top guys. Bring in LeBron. Bring in Kevin Durant. Bring in guys like that have been around. Be like, okay, honestly, we get that you don't compete as much. Say 5 years ago, though, what would we have had to do that would have made you compete? And just ask them. And I mean, at this point, like LeBron said, he probably only has 2 or 3 years left in the league. He's gonna tell you, right? You can figure this out. It's not. I don't think it's a lost cause. I mean, it's such a sacred event. I saw people compare it to the Super Bowl because it's like the one time a year where the NBA gathers in one spot where we know that they're going to gather in Indianapolis, or I saw Milwaukee was bidding for something, or like Vegas, or whatever, wherever the All Star game is. That's where everybody's gathering that year. It's because like for the Super Bowl. you all gather, that Super Bowl this year was going to be in Vegas, right? And for the NBA, it's like, okay, well, the finals are whoever makes it. Like that, they get home court advantage and home games and everything like that in the finals, right? So last year it was in Miami and in Denver because the Nuggets and the Heat were playing in the finals. You don't really have like a neutral site finals like you do in the NFL. And so I did like that kind of idea of it. It's like you still kind of had this sacred get together event um, that a lot of people can go to and still make this the event that it maybe wasn't or didn't used to be, but still have some semblance of that. And we're not asking for Alex Caruso and I don't know, just name your like most gritty defenders. I don't know why Alex Caruso was the first one to come to mind. Tons of good defenders across the league, but we're not asking for like Victor Wembanyama 5 blocks every game or Rudy Gobert defense all game. Like nobody liked Gobert in the All Star game. What do you think he doesn't make it anymore? Yeah, he's still a defensive player of the year level player, but guess what? We'd rather see Cat in the All Star game because he's going to put up 50, even though he's on a losing team. He's going to shoot 9 threes and put up 60 points, and they're going to lose to the Charlotte Hornets. Like, that's a more entertaining All Star, which makes sense. And I'm not against that, and I understand that. So we're not asking for elite defense, but like, does it hurt for a couple possessions a game for you to really get in your stance and play good defense and try to cause a turnover or force a guy to make a tough shot? I mean, again, I don't know if I've talked about this in a video, and I'm really spent a lot longer on the All Star game than I wanted to here. This is going to be close to an hour long video, but that's okay. Like I said, I think this was going to be more podcasty, and we'll get back to normal videos by the next video. But my favorite, like when I think of a shot or a play, that's my favorite play that I've watched over the last 3 or 4 years of basketball. Obviously, I love watching Jokic, LeBron, like any top player. There's a play I could pick out for him, right? Or numerous where I wouldn't be able to pick out a play. But my favorite one, and I think of two teams that aren't my favorite teams. They're not even in conferences that I like, and this is a good segue to talk about the Celtics. Is the Jason Tatum shot over Giannis a couple years ago, where he sidestepped threes, which he doesn't do as much often as he used to do a couple years ago, now at least. But he sidestepped threes, and it was at that point Giannis was my defensive player of the year, and Tatum was like top 10 in MVP for me. I don't think he was like top 5 or anything like that. But it was two guys. It was offense. It was great offense versus great defense, and the great offense won, which is a very symbolic thought of today's game when we look at teams that were top 10 in offenses throughout history not even being top 20 compared to this season stats, which I do think is something to be addressed by the NBA. Again, potentially a ref thing or whatever. More stuff Adam Silver has to kind of iron out in the off season and stuff like that and see where we go with that. And a lot of ideas have been floated around for that as well and thoughts on that. I think more that'll progress following the season or throughout the playoffs, depending on if the offensive rate keeps up there, which I don't expect it necessarily to. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have more of an offensive explosion, which we've seen throughout the season with the plethora of 70-point games and all sorts of 60-point games and stuff like that. Explosive nights from guys and higher offensive ratings than we've seen almost in the history of the league. But I do think, again, that helps that regular season numbers. Like if you can tune into a game and you watch Luka drop 70 or Embiid drop 70 or Jokic drop a triple double against every single team in the league or Wemby get a 5x5, which he just got today. Like we've had so many events this season, which I think you can tune in and a casual fan can enjoy throughout the regular season, which isn't always the case. So I do think that's been good, probably for ratings for the NBA, if I did have to guess. But again, that's my favorite play that I can think of over the past few years is that sidestep on the left wing from Tatum right over Giannis, and it's like this is one of the best defense players in the game. It's one of the best offensive players in the game, and that was great defense, great offense, and just a great play. I remember watching the replay of it and just being like, "That's poetry." Like that was poetry in motion to define what today's game is. A sidestep 3-pointer from a wing over a 7 foot, 250 pound monster forward. They just boom splash, right? Just perfect poetry of what today's game is, and just almost a summary of today's game. But as I did say, I wanted to segue that into talking about Boston. Now, Boston currently is my favorite to come out of the East. They have been a well oiled machine throughout the season, clearing anybody in the conference by 8 games for wins so far throughout the season, being 44-12. The next closest being Milwaukee and Cleveland at 36 wins. Cleveland currently holding the 2 seed there. And yeah, I mean, Boston has just glued better than anybody else. They have clearly the best defensive backcourt in the entirety of the league. In my opinion, you have three all-star level players in the front court, with Jalen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Porzingis. I think Porzingis has been their second best player this year. I think a lot of people underrated what he did in Washington last year, and that's why I loved the move and the pickup for him to them. Actually, more than I did Drew Holiday, though I think Drew Holiday might be a more crucial part of this team, even though Porzingis has kind of opened up the offense more. I think the fact that on any given night, especially in this conference, like Damian Lillard is going to on every possession play against Derek White and then Drew Holiday, two of the best defensive guards in the league. Or Donovan Mitchell is going to play against Derek White and Drew Holiday. Oh wait, and Darius Garland gets the other guy. You know what I mean? Like this team is so well matchup wise fit versus their conference. They've played so well against good and bad teams throughout the season and look to be a relative juggernaut in their conference. With that said, currently whoever comes out of the West is my NBA Finals winner. I don't see the Celtics as winning it. Part of that is they haven't won it, and I do think this brings up a potential conversation of like, does Jason Tatum get it done if he doesn't win it this year because it's easily the most talented team he's played with. And I do think that if you see a couple series go a little bit different, and I posed this question to my friend the other day, and I was like, dude, if you see Tatum win against LeBron his rookie year and go to the finals, and if you see Tatum win in Curry or against Curry in the NBA Finals, and then you see him go to the NBA Finals again last year, win or lose to Jokic, um, that would be at least two finals appearances, a championship, a series win as a rookie over prime LeBron James, a series win in the finals over Steph Curry, um, that essentially would have negated him ever getting a Finals MVP if the Warriors don't ever win another one, which we'll see at this point. Um, and then this year being the favorite to go back to the NBA Finals, I think he'd win the MVP this year. I think he would be um, talked about as a potential guy that could be an all-time great, because he would have just as many titles if he won it this year. Let's say he's two-time champion, one-time MVP, has beaten LeBron in this series, has beaten Curry in this series as both prime players. Um, you'd be looking at him as all-time great. That's as many championships as LeBron or as Giannis and Jokic have combined, and that's two championships at the age of 19. I mean, you can't do anything better than that when we're talking about history. But I do think that there's some interesting stuff with Tatum as that goes. Now, I don't necessarily look at him as a guy that chokes in the playoffs. I think he's well different than that from what we've seen throughout his playoff history. I think he's had a lot of matchups. I mean, the fact that he ever even got to play against LeBron in the conference finals his rookie year was a moment in itself. I mean, Terry Rozier was looked at as God that playoffs, him and Tatum, which was super fun time to look back on. But yeah, Boston is by far my favorites. I've loved what Cleveland has done even throughout their injuries. I did like the case for Jared Allen to be an All-Star this year. But yeah, I think Cleveland has just been a very entertaining team to watch to this point throughout the season, and I'm excited to see what they can do in the playoffs. Obviously, last year they lose to the Knicks. Maybe they play the Knicks again in the playoffs this year. The Knicks do look very good. The Knicks actually would be my second favorite team to come out of the Eastern Conference right now, just due to the fact that the Bucks haven't quite gelled yet. Cleveland hasn't shown playoff success yet, though I do. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell's had some in his career, but the rest of the core there is a little bit questionable as it regards to that. I like the shooting that they've increased there with Strus and Morel coming in and being good shooters for them. And yeah, I mean, Cleveland's just been a good team to this point. Milwaukee sits at third. They've still struggled. They've struggled even more since bringing Doc Rivers. I know all the jokes were like, oh, well, they already lost in the playoffs. Honestly, like, I don't necessarily disagree. Like, oh, you brought in Doc Rivers, you lost in the playoffs. But look, they're clearly worse. They weren't necessarily like a favorite prior. The Dame and Giannis thing still hasn't really fully clicked, and they do miss the perimeter defense. They do miss Chris Middleton not being who he was, and they do play Bobby Portis way too many minutes. But yeah, I just think Milwaukee, they're I don't know if they're gonna do it this year, and it might be like, okay, you bring in Dame this year, you struggle this year, You probably fire Doc Rivers come the offseason. You're paying 4 coaches next year, salaries. You just need to, and Giannis talked about, like, he doesn't like the revolving coach door, but, like, if Doc Rivers doesn't get it done, having Giannis and Dame and coming in midseason, maybe you keep him, but do you really want to fire another coach partially through the season next year? Do you want to lose next year in the playoffs and then fire him, and then now you've wasted 2 years of these guys together? I don't know. That's a dilemma for the front office. I don't get paid the money or am not a big enough fan of the Milwaukee Bucks to figure that out. But yeah, I think there's a very good chance that, okay, this is an adjustment year to figure this out. Maybe you try to move on from Chris Middleton, restructure some of this roster around these two to truly fit these two, versus a roster that was fit around Giannis, that has kind of been shaken up and added Dame to it, right? So maybe you try to do that over the offseason and then run it back and see where it goes from there. Again, I think New York is my second favorite team to come out of this. I just think they're a very glued together team. They are a very good team, 1 through 9, 1 through 10, that you can see playing well in the playoffs. Obviously, Thibodeau plays his star players a lot of minutes. You had an OG injury kind of come at a good time because you had the All Star break come up there for it. And I just think all the players like to play together. They fit well together. They play on the offensive and the defensive side of the game. And Jalen Brunson has been playing like a top 10 MVP caliber player. Now, obviously, I wouldn't put him as like a top 5 or anything like that, but like he's played very, very spectacular basketball. And the report that came out that Dallas offered him or wouldn't offer him a 4-year, $55 million contract is absurd to me because honestly, I don't know his contract off the top of my head. I'm actually going to look at it here. But it's definitely more than 4 years, 55. I want to say it's close to double that because I remember a lot of people talking about him being overpaid, me being one of those people because though I thought he was worth a good chunk of money, well over 4 years, 55, I did not think he was worth what he ended up getting. Which, as NBA fans, what do we do other than pocket watch, right? Um, and I cannot find his contract to save my life. Regardless, he definitely got paid a lot more than that, and it was something that a lot of people were critical of. But I mean, to this point, it's proven off as more than the right investment. He's making 26 million this year, so that's pretty much half of that contract. Yeah, much more than what he got paid. I want to say it was close to a 4-year 120, something around those lines, or 4-year 140, something like that. But yeah, I mean, Jalen Brunson's played great basketball, and honestly, I just like the way the team fits together. I think OG's addition midseason was great. I think you are a strong defensive team. You had good offseason. You have a coach that obviously is going to focus on the defensive and the hustle end, which is actually the type of players that you have. And then beyond that, I think Philly, you're probably not going to see Embiid come back. If he does, he's going to be injured. I just take them out of the conversation completely as it goes for winning it all or coming out of the East at this point. Indy is still a little bit young, still adjusting to having Tyrese Halliburton, or not, having Tyrese and Siakam, I guess, is the duo. More of what I meant to say there was having Siakam now. But I do still like Indy as a fun team. I think they're going to be more of what Cleveland was last year, where they're going to be a fun team. They're going to make the playoffs. Tyrese has never played in a playoff as the main guy on this team, so they'll make the playoff. They'll have a little bit of a short stint, probably only be one series. They're probably going to try to stay out of the play-in. If they do play the play-in, maybe they can get out of the first round if they match up with the Cleveland. I think those two teams are relatively evenly matched. You have the dark horse in Miami, who we are all eerily aware of in the Eastern Conference, a team that has made the NBA Finals more than any other team in the Eastern Conference over the last 4 seasons. And then you have Orlando, Chicago, Atlanta, Brooklyn. I do like Orlando's progress. They've fallen off since the start of the season. As for the rest, it's a little bit of a dumpster fire for the rest of the Eastern Conference with Detroit sneakily about to pass Washington in the conference. And I guess if you want a bold prediction there, I think the Wizards end as the worst team in the Eastern Conference. Only one game above Detroit with one more game played than Detroit. So if Detroit wins their next game, they are tied record-wise, which I think just makes the Kyle Kuzma tweet about you just don't want to be the team that loses to them at this point the funniest tweet of the season, whether Washington finishes below them or not. And then the second funniest part of the Washington Wizards is benching the player that you thought was your franchise player. Now, I do think Jordan Poole fits best as a 6 man, and I think his shooting splits have been atrocious in Washington. And he was depressed to go there, and he's played like a depressed millionaire over there. So we'll see what happens with them going forward. I did see something came out about executives thinking that his contract is the worst in the league. Though I think it's up there. I don't think anything's comparable to the Ben Simmons contract. And once Jordan Poole's contract runs out, I could see him being an underpaid and undervalued player as a very, very good six man following his first major deal, because I think his next deal will be a little bit lower. Definitely not closer to max money. It'll be much closer to a mid level exception. Maybe a 1 year prove. You could see that. That's a potential. I don't know. Again, these are things down the road. These are things that are not currently affecting anything. But yeah, I would still put Levine's a little bit closer, and probably Levine and Pools are relatively similar, even though Levine's a much better player. And then yeah, Ben Simmons' contract's got to be the worst in the league. As for Chicago, I do want to make a quick point. They hate their fans. I think I have seen more Chicago fans pissed off about this year and them not making any moves over the offseason and at the trade deadline than when they had Tim Boyle as their head coach. And I'm pretty sure Chicago fans were like considering killing the guy. Like they hated him. The level of hate towards that man was unprecedented. Well, not even unprecedented. I mean, it was incalculable and completely warranted because he was something as a head coach. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it for the Eastern Conference. Let's get to my favorite conference, where we have too many stars, and if any of them would like to go to the Eastern Conference, as a Denver Nuggets fan, it would be much appreciated. So instead of starting at the top, where my Denver Nuggets are close to, let's start at the bottom. San Antonio Spurs. Wemby, though Chet was my preseason rookie of the year, and the OKC Thunder are the 2 seed. Wemby is my rookie of the year. He did just have that 5x5 game. He has been probably the best defensive player in the entire league. Arguably with Gobert, you could argue those two. I think those have been the two best defensive players in the league this season, and that's only managed to get him 11 wins. So, yeah, they need to get some playmaking on the roster. They really need one of these top guys to be somebody that can be a running mate with him. Since the Shohan thing stopped being a point guard thing, they improved their playmaking a lot. But they really only have Jones to get him the ball. See, I mean, you got one point guard that really should be more of a six man type of guy or eighth man type of guy. Your guard off the bench as a true playmaker that gets him the ball. Beyond that, you got a lot of guys that you looked at with a lot of potential. Vassell just got paid. Vassell just got paid, and Keldon Johnson had been paid prior, and I liked the potential out of Keldon Johnson. He hasn't quite, he kind of plateaued once I really hopped on the Keldon Johnson's train, which kind of sucked for me because I really thought he was going to turn into a close to all-star player. Near to a little bit worse of a level of Mikal Bridges, right? Like that really high tier role player, obviously a very different player than Mikal Bridges, but I was hoping that he would get to that. Hasn't quite gotten there. And it's a few guys that played on some bad Spurs teams that, ended up getting the number one pick for Victor Wembanyama, and were kind of shot chuckers that have proceeded to continue to do that after bringing in a generational talent. Now, Wemby has been as good as I think he was advertised and could be this year. And again, I think it's really, them, the Wizards, the Pistons, Portland, Memphis, all these teams are kind of looking towards next year more than the rest of this year. So the Spurs overall have been a shit team this year. But yeah, we've liked to watch Wemby. He's a he's an alien. I literally saw a side by side picture of the Space Jam dunk from Michael Jordan, right, where this man is taking on the Monstars, right, and saving the planet and the basketball superpowers of all the players, right, side by side with a fucking Wembanyama dunk, and Wemby's was more impressive, and they animated Michael Jordan's arm to extendo arm, right, like he's an alien, literally. There's no other way to explain it. Him and Chet is shooting like 40% from three. How Jalen Brunson at 6 foot is competing for an MVP in any regard with guys like that is crazy. Scares me for my short kings out there. Scares me for my short king. Shout out Isaiah Thomas and his top three in MVP for the Celtics. But that brings us to Portland. Again, another team looking towards next year. Memphis is interesting. Now, Gigi Jackson, he's had some suspension issues with them. He's a really young kid. Just got a extension with some guaranteed money. Hopefully, Memphis, the whole jaw thing, but outside of the jaw thing, they've been a relatively normal team. Outside of John Dylan Brooks, um, hopefully he can kind of get his stuff together and like develop more into a pro, especially going into next year, because he's really that wing that they've been missing, that they've been targeting in the draft, that they've been trying to find in free agency. That has just really been the true missing part of this organization. It's part of the reason they went and got Marcus Smart because they're like, look, we just need a guy who can be 3 and D. We don't care if we run a small lineup and we put Desmond Bain at the three. Like they've been desperate to try to find this. I mean, they have tried to find it in Brandon Clark. Okay, he's more of a big. They tried to find it in Yuta Watanabe. Okay, he's probably not good enough to be this. You tried to find it in Luke Kennard. Okay, he can't play defense, but he's a great shooter. You tried to find it in Konkar. You tried to find it in Salty Aldama and Zaire Williams. I mean, there are so many threes, fours, shooting guard type of players that they've tried to really find to fit this role that they needed. And Gigi Jackson, a guy that was ranked really, really high in his class, recommitted. I loved his story when I really had some people kind of break it down, and I can't remember which podcast broke it down for me when I was really deep diving into it. And it was like, look, this is a guy that was ranked, I can't remember if it was like top five or like number one in his class, reclassifies, decommits from North Carolina, one of the few guys to do it. So shout out to him. Because go Blue Devils. But yeah, he decommits from North Carolina, ends up going to South Carolina as a younger, essentially as a guy that should still be in high school. They don't have any talent on South Carolina, so it's give the ball to Gigi Jackson and let him do what he wants. I mean, this was a guy that was supposed to go to North Carolina and be, a number one, number two, number three pick in the NBA draft, but he reclassifies, goes there, doesn't quite have the shooting splits, doesn't really have the talent around him, kind of just you run the offense as fuck it, get the ball to Gigi and let him work. Let him throw up a shot. So he doesn't have necessarily the greatest season. Goes in the second round, I want to say pick 45 to the Memphis Grizzlies, and has really been a star for them this year. Not like an all-star or anything like that, but he's been the breakout star for them. Beyond obviously the surge of Desmond Bain. I mean, Desmond Bain was playing some great basketball to start the season. Um, when you look, I mean, yeah, I just want to look at Desmond Bain's numbers. I mean, on his career, he averaged 17. This year, he's averaging 24. When you look at what he did last year, it's an increase of about 3 points per game. That's without his best player on the court. That's with him getting more primary defensive assignments. He's kept his 3 point percentage at 38%. It was at 40% last year, so he caught a slight dip. Nothing necessarily to worry about, but yeah, he's played great this year. Only played 37 games, but yeah, I mean, it's almost going to seem like this loss of a year for them is good because you got GG Jackson. You've gotten to kind of just give him the run that you probably wouldn't have given him had you had a healthy jaw and the shots that you wouldn't have been able to give him had you had all these healthy players. Now, I didn't love the getting rid of Steven Adams, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a minuscule thing to happen for this team. If this team could end up getting the number one pick or getting the number two pick and somehow getting Sar, pairing him with Jaren Jackson Jr., who's one of the best, if not the best defensive player in the league. I mean, what he does as a switch defender, blocking shots, his foul rate has gone down. He can steal the ball. He has been phenomenal. So again, one of probably the top five defensive players this season in my mind would be Jaren Jackson Jr. He as well has had a great season, 22 points this year. And I know I'm spending a little bit on Memphis, but they are a team that's kind of looking more towards next year. Won't get a lot of talk as it goes for the rest of the year. Now, obviously, look, I think yeah, Jaren Jackson is just he was an all star last year, defensive player of the year, right? Like he is just he's such a good player. 2-time block champion, 2-time all defensive team. He should be first team all defense. Probably this year. Oh well, maybe not because he might not make it over Gobert and Wemby. I don't know. Well, that'll be interesting to see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, Jaren Jackson's been phenomenal. If you could pair him with Alexander Sarr, man, what a duo that would be. What a duo that would be. Bring GG off the bench. You could still go with that small guard lineup because you got a 7-3 guy and a 6'10 guy that are both amazing at defense out there. This could be a year that is a blessing in disguise for Memphis to get that surge of youth at positions of need that they needed to maybe take that next step towards truly being a contender that we all think that they potentially can, as they have one of the best young players in the entire association as long as he stays on the court and doesn't get suspended or doesn't injure himself or whatever it is, right? Houston has had a steep fall off along with Utah from their early success. And I think both those teams will try to continue to improve their pick odds as the rest of the season goes on. Golden State and Los Angeles have been on crazy win streaks, as well as most of the Western Conference, as both of them sit for play-in seeds. And a lot of people are thinking that one of them isn't even going to end up making the final playoffs as you go from a 1 to 8 type of breakdown there. honestly, I don't see that as a very far off thing. Could I see potentially a Phoenix that still continue to gel and had injury issues and doesn't necessarily have the deepest team falling into a 9 or 10 spot and maybe not making it? Potentially. Could I see Sacramento doing the same thing? A little less. I think that team's built more for the regular season, but it is such a tough Western Conference, and it seems that Golden State has figured some stuff out, bringing Clay off the bench, having Pajemski, who also has been a phenomenal player this year. What a pick by the Golden State Warriors there, and then also running Draymond at center, where he hasn't choked out anybody in the last week or so. We left that to Najee Marshall to choke out Jimmy Butler today. Although the Warriors did not leave coming back from All Star break without fighting. That Grant Williams interaction was quite funny. I did enjoy watching that from Quinones. Regardless, yeah, I think the Warriors have figured a little more out than the Lakers, though the Lakers have been good. And if out of these teams, if I see one of them popping into maybe an out of playing spot, which honestly isn't far off. I mean, it's 3 games, right? It's 3 games between Golden State and Sacramento. And Sacramento's 1 game behind Dallas, so 4 games, and you're not in the plane anymore. Very possible. Very possible. New Orleans could fall down. There's a lot to see as the last few or the last quarter of the season really plays out, and it's going to depend a lot of playoff seedings, a lot of matchups, which I think are more important than ever for the Western Conference this year, because you have teams where it's like, okay, Minnesota has relatively recently historically matched up well against Denver. Okay. Um, OKC doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience if they go against a Golden State Warriors in the first round that have been there, they've done it multiple times. Does that lack of experience kind of haunt them? I mean, the last time you saw Shea and Lou Dort in the playoffs was like 5 seasons ago with Chris Paul. And as for beyond that, I mean, Gordon Hayward's the only other guy with playoff experience, and that was coming off the bench for the Celtics or playing a third small forward role for that team. Um, Back with Kyrie Irving on the Celtics. Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of playoff experience on that team. And so that's a team that could get caught like it. I think just matchups are going to be very, very interesting when we get to playoff time for the Western Conference, more so than even the East, where you do still have sleeper teams like Miami, where you could still see a team with Philly maybe get a healthy Embiid back closer to an 8 seed and make a run against a top team, right? So I do think the seeding for the Western Conference is a little bit more important and very, very interesting to deep dive and look at as we continue throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, Golden State and Los Angeles, they're going to continue to fight to get in. Phoenix falls similarly into that plane and hasn't had quite the exact same level of recent win streak success and media attention that the other two have had, still only being the 8 seed and currently in a play-in situation. Sacramento has had a steep fall from last year, though still being a current play or playoff team. Um, Again, I think this is relatively where we expected Sacramento to fall off to. Nobody even expected them to make the playoffs last year, so last year alone was a success. They do fall out of the playoffs or into the play and not make the playoffs. I think at Sacramento, you look at this as a very downside season, especially considering the fact that you've seen such progression out of a guy like Keegan Murray. You've seen Sabonis be an MVP type of player this year for them. Had they been in higher seed, had they been a 1 seed or something like that, right? I think he would get more buzz for it at that point. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a potential chance for a letdown for Kings fans. And I hate to say that because I know Kings fans don't want to hear it. It's what a lot of the media is going to say that New Orleans and Sacramento have a large chance to fall out. And out of the teams that I look at, they are the most likely. And then I would put Phoenix in there as well, almost. Beyond that, Dallas. If Luca can get in the top three, top four in the Western Conference, give him the MVP. I'm a Denver Nuggets fan, but Luca has been the best player this season, hands down. Like if I had to do a players ranking, and we're going like 1 through 10 or whatever, Luca's number one. I mean, I don't got to name the rest right now, but like Luca would be my best player in the association right now. Yeah, he's not like an elite defender or anything. He's not shit on defense, but he can score as much, if not more, than anybody in the NBA right now. He can score with ease. He has a really good running mate in Kyrie Irving. They have a really good rookie center. You bring in Daniel Gafford, who can be a backup. I love bringing in PJ Washington, and now you have Washington and the Maxi Kleba, both as like stretch four, stretch five options as well. So you've got rim runners, you've got stretch guys, you've got wings, and Hardaway and Green, and this team just fits around them with good role players. That it's like, shit, Dallas can make a run. Dallas can make a run, and this team, I think is the best team Luka Doncic has ever played with. And though I'm not picking them to come out of the West, I mean, the West is so stacked. I expect the Dallas Mavericks to be in the second round of the playoffs, regardless of seeding. Um, I mean, yes, there's a few matchups that, I mean, you play the Nuggets, you play the Clippers, seasoned teams with MVP level players and former MVPs on them. Maybe it's a different thing that happens. I would love my dream scenario for a first round series is to see this monster of a Clippers team with Harden and Westbrook and PG and Kawhi. You have Finals MVP on that team. You have two former winners of an MVP and a former top three MVP voted player in Paul George. And then on the other side, you have Luca, who is a guy that is constantly downplayed for the MVP, somehow has just not broken into getting his first one. Um, which I mean makes sense. I mean, he's competing against Giannis, Jokic, and Embiid every single year for it, which like I mean, fuck, that's hard to beat. You know what I mean? Especially recently. Those guys have just been doing such historic things, regardless of my thoughts on Embiid winning it last year. It's not like Luca was my second. Yeah, but I think Luka's been the best player in the association this year, and Dallas has a really good chance to push themselves up the seating a little bit here. New Orleans, I think, has found something. I love JJ's take on more of 8 point Zion. He talked about when he was there for Zion's best season, his second year in the league, and how he really, like, 10 games in a season or something like that. They kind of looked at Zion and they're like, well, shit, why don't we just have this monster bring up the ball and we're just going to put shooters around him and figure it out from there. And it worked. And he had his best career season. I think that was the year he made the All-Star team and averaged like 28 on like 70% shooting or something absolutely fucking ridiculous, right? And JJ kind of brought up like, yeah, they're doing that more this year as well, and you're seeing some of that success. Now, I don't think Zion has played up to that level this year. I think you can tell he's still not necessarily in full shape. And maybe with some playoff success, you see it. I do think he's played himself more into shape as the season has continued to progress and go on. And though him and Anthony Edwards have had some funny off the court things go on, if you guys pay attention to that, I again, I think he's had a better season this year. He's been healthy. The Pelicans have been good. They are a team you have to consider a constant watch out for because without Zion, this was still a team that took. Um, did they play the Phoenix Suns? Was that the team or the Mavericks? Somebody that had gone deep in the playoffs the year prior. They took them to like 7 in the first round, and that was pretty much off of just the back of CJ. And CJ's maybe the fourth best player on this team at this point. Certainly the veteran of the team. The future of Brandon Ingram is questionable for this team, or maybe even Zion. You might have to choose which star you stick with going to the future. I know there have been some comments from stuff on that, but as for this year, this is still a team that has two All Star level players and a former All Star level player in CJ McCollum, who is a veteran. Has good role players around him with good shooting. You've got good guys off the bench, some of the best defenders in the league, and like Herb Jones and stuff like that. And a team that, again, like Dallas, has good complementary role players to fit their star players that could make a run. And we haven't even gotten to the top four. Now, this top four is hilariously good. Not only were they all tied with the exact same record on the same day at one point, which was kind of the craziest stat to see, but Denver is the reigning champions and has a two-time MVP Nikola Jokic on the roster with playoff risers like Jamal Murray. Though it has been a down shooting season for Aaron Gordon, and you don't quite have the depth that you had last year, which I do think a lot of people are going to start to point out as we get closer to the playoffs. That's why matchups are very important because if you play against like the Minnesota Timberwolves, part of the reason they've been so successful against them is not because you're putting Rudy Gobert, a multiple time defensive player of the year, on Jokic, because when you do that, he gets cooked. And that's historically accurate. You can check the tape. But you're putting him on Aaron Gordon and making Aaron Gordon beat you from the 3 point line. Though Aaron Gordon stepped up in the playoffs last year from three, this year he's struggled from three. And it's been very apparent throughout the season, along with the depth and some of the shooting off the bench as well, kind of past Reggie Jackson, that there could be some sort of 3 point issue that arises come playoffs. Now, you do have a guy like KCP, who's one of the most consistent 3 point shooters when it comes to playoff time. Michael Porter Jr. is one of the best catch and shoot players in the league. You've seen some progression from Christian Braun. He's shooting 35% off the bench. Obviously, Reggie Jackson's shooting 36. Jamal Murray's a 40% shooter. Jokic is a good shooter at the center position. Julian Strawther has some potential there. You can get streaky with it. But when you look at a guy like Aaron Gordon, he's barely shooting 30%. He's barely shooting it one time a game. at 1.9 times. So he's shooting about 2 times a game, and he's barely shooting at 30%. Like there's a little bit of a lack there that like come playoff time, it's something you can attack, and there's not a lot of things that you can attack on a defending championship roster. So we'll see how that plays out for Denver come playoffs. Obviously, I'm hoping it isn't much of a factor being a Nuggets fan, but I do think it's something to note. And I would say currently Jokic would be my favorite for MVP just based off standings right now. I would say Jokic. Then I would say probably Giannis, and then third. Third's a toss up because he kind of takes standings a little bit out of it. The next three guys in no order would be somewhat Tatum, Shea, Luca, and then you can throw Anthony Edwards relatively in there as well. You could put Donovan Mitchell. I don't think he's really getting any buzz, but I think he should at least be getting some buzz. Yeah, I don't know. I think currently though, Jokic would be my favorite just based off of the standings to win the MVP. Will he? Will he not? We'll see. As for the Clippers, obviously we kind of talked about them a bit. Four-headed monster. They have just gotten better since I got them out. I did go to that Clippers Nuggets game closer back, all the way back to the in-season tournament, which feels so long ago. I mean, it feels like we started the season, we had a little bit of the season. Oh, now we have an in-season tournament. And we kind of went through a lull there, and we had like more of the bulk of the middle of the season, and then we hit All-Star break, and now we got the last bit of the season. This season has been weirdly long, but very entertaining. And yeah, so I think the Clippers are definitely a threat. A lot of people are going to start favoriting them, I think, in the media come playoff time to be their champions, and I can understand that. I see the talent on the team, but I do also see that matchup wise, like they're small if they play at Minnesota, right? Do they match up great against OKC? I don't know. I mean, OKC's got the youth on their side, right? We've seen a lot of injuries come up on the Clippers side, so there's a lot to kind of consider. But I do think this is definitely a very strong team that's continued to get better as the integration of Harden. Um, and Harden's been a good defensive player this year. Something to note. But as the integration of Harden has continued throughout the season, and as he's really kind of been their focal point on offense, whilst still having two other guys on the team that are better than him, and a guy like Russell Westbrook that can facilitate just as well as he can. Well, maybe not just as well anymore, but like I would say Harden's a better facilitator anymore. But still, one of the most energetic and hustle and just players you want on the court for your team. Like if I could have Russell Westbrook on my team, I want Russell Westbrook, and that's not necessarily an opinion for everybody, but that's my opinion. So as for the top two seeds, they are both young. I as a Nuggets fan, am more scared of Minnesota after a, n- the most success shown I think out of any team against us last year was Minnesota. And I think Anthony Edwards has taken another step, and the team has overall, as a unit, taken another step. Mike Conley's been very consistent for them. Again, we've talked a little bit about Gobert and his defensive ability throughout. Plus, you got the double big lineup. And then again, I mentioned Anthony Edwards in an MVP type of conversation for the level of player that he's been. And then OKC really has just taken such a step forward that I couldn't have imagined. I know some people were like, "Oh, maybe they'll be a top four seed," and I was like, "Yo, I think OKC is going to make the playoffs, but you're delusional if they think they're going to be a top four seed." Well, I mean, it's looking like they might be the number one seed now. Currently tied with Minnesota, they are the two seed right now, but I mean, there's a very good chance OKC is the number one seed, and there's a very good chance that the number one seed gets upset in the first round, based on some of the guys lower in the conference. Again, think some of that comes down to experience, but at the same time, like Shea has played like an MVP level player. Jalen Williams has only showed progression. Shout out to his brother playing at CU. He looks to be like a guy that's going to go top five ish in the next draft. And then Chet Holmgren has been one of the best rookies this year, shooting 40% as a 7 foot big man and an amazing defender as well in his rookie season. You bring in Gordon Hayward. You already you trade away like a guy like Trey Mann, which I love to pick, that pickup for Charlotte because it's a guy that can come in, get minutes. Maybe you can bring him as a spark plug and truly develop him into a really nice six man for you. Um, which I think Charlotte, they're just weird. They're weird. They have talent and they just don't win. 14 wins, do better. Um, I don't know. It's the East. Like, is it really that hard to get 30, 40 wins in the East? You have 14 wins. Um, anyways, OKC. I mean, yeah, they're very, very good. They are very, very young, and we'll see how that comes come playoff time. I'm gonna go with experience. I'm also gonna go with talent, and I mean, if I see a team that's more talented with more experience that maybe didn't have the regular season success that OKC did, and maybe is an older team that doesn't have the legs to be playing such great basketball that OKC has played night in and night out, come playoff time, they might lose a 7-game series. I think it's highly possible, and I think you're probably a year away from a deep playoff run for OKC at least. But I mean, at the same time, like shit, I don't know. I mean, how many people thought Shea was going to be an MVP level player? I know when I was watching that draft, I was ecstatic when Michael Porter Jr. fell to the Nuggets. I thought the Clippers had 2 picks. I think they went Jerome Robinson. No, not Jerome Robinson. Or I don't know, something like that. He was a two guard, like 6'4", kind of had a little bit of a fro. Anyways, him and Shea, and then we got Michael Porter Jr. And I was ecstatic. I was like, oh, they're stupid. And I was like, who is Shy Gilligis? Who is this guy? Who are they taking here? Um, and I was just making fun of him. Well, Shea goes on to, get traded for Paul George and become an MVP level player, though Michael Porter Jr. has been great. He has never developed into that number one ranked prospect he was in high school, though I think he's been a phenomenal player in his own right. But yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of crazy. Like, imagine the Clippers got Shea and Porter Jr. and only traded one of them, and one of those guys was still there with the team that they have today, or was there still with Kawhi and PG when they first got there. Crazy to think about. Crazy to think about. Also, don't try to take credit and say that you should have kept Shea, Doc Rivers. Some of Doc Rivers' comments have pissed me off, and we'll get into this here a little bit more at the end of the show. I honestly don't hate that JJ came at him on first take the other day, and obviously JJ went back and forth with Pat Bev. I did love that Pat Bev gets traded, marks on the calendar. Hey, and honestly, I think some of Pat Bev stuff is just fucking hilariously stupid shenanigans. That's great for drama. But he marks on the calendar. Okay, this is when we're playing Philly. I'm gonna get my get back. They chose Kyle Lowry over me. At this point in the career, I'd probably take Pat Bev. I do get bringing Kyle Lowry, hometown kid, more of a veteran. That's probably not a bad thing for the locker room, though. I think Pat Bev is a good locker room guy to have. But I do like that he, gets traded to a new team, marks all that on the calendar, and then stands up for his coach more than most players in the league stand up for their coach, because you always see these pseudo like kind of fuck that guy comments out of a lot of players, or a lot of non-comments from players. But he saw the interview from JJ, immediately goes out and says something, broke his own trade at the trade deadline, so shout out to Pat Bev for that. But I loved it from both guys because obviously JJ played for him, so he has a lot of credibility on the subject, and I don't necessarily love shitting on a guy that you played for and you've talked so highly of those Clippers teams throughout his media career. So I don't necessarily love that from him, but I do understand like saying he is not taking accountability now. I don't know if I'd say like he never has, because like Stephen A said when you watch the clip, that's a very serious allegation coming from a guy that played for him, and I do think that probably burned a bridge. That I don't know if JJ had burned yet or not, but it definitely I think at this point probably burned a bridge and would take reconciliation to not have the bridge be burned. But yeah, I did love the comments out of him because truthfully, Doc has gotten hired, and I feel like I see a new interview every single day. I mean, first he's claiming that he didn't even really know what's going on, and then they're losing. And then he's saying, "Oh, I've only been in Milwaukee 2 days," and I totally understand that. I mean, you picked up a team in the middle of a road trip, and you're now the third coach that they've had this season, and you didn't even know why they picked you, but they paid you a lot of money, so you're gonna do it, right? I mean, the same thing happened to Monty Williams for the Detroit Pistons. He was gonna take a break from coaching, and well, we'll make you the highest paid coach. You know what? I mean, yeah, just run me the 5-year, 7-year deal where I'm the highest paid coach. Like, of course, like if you're gonna get $40 million to coach a basketball team, it's hard to say no to that. So Doc Rivers leaves. He goes to do that. Leaves the media stuff that he was doing, um, and that. But then every week or every day, you're seeing a new comment about it, like about this and about that. And oh, I think I told the Clippers organization that they should have kept Shea because he's going to be an MVP player. No, you didn't. Or maybe you said you wanted to keep Shea. You did not say nothing about him being no MVP level player or that he was going to be better than Paul George. I promise you. I promise you. Because as much as Shea was good that rookie year where they go to the playoffs with the Clippers, and that was you kind of your rough and tough playoff team with the Clippers, didn't really have a star player, and they were playing this rookie guard a lot of minutes and Shea and all this stuff. And yeah, I can't remember how well they did in the playoffs, but I do remember that team relatively well. You did not think he was going to be an MVP. Nobody thought he was going to be. Everybody thought he'd be a good starting point guard in the league. But beyond that, not much, right? So I didn't love that he was making those comments, and then I didn't love that he was trying to take credit for the James Harden trade out of Philly or whatever. Like, stop, stop. You fell apart in the playoffs last year with Philadelphia. You got fired for a reason. you had a lead against Boston, who, and I think you matched up well against Philly, but you choked. You had 2 games to close it out, and you didn't. Some of that a lot of that is on the players, but also you're a notoriously bad coach at finishing series, and that's another one on the resume. I hate how much the Celtics team holds on to the '08 finals. It's like it was a three-peat and a dominant win, and they had the toughest schedule. Like the way the '08 Celtics team talks about the finals that they won is more illustrious than Michael Jordan, who shits on his own teammates for the six that he won. I mean, it's absurd how much they hold on to that, and it's mostly the players, and a lot of those players are all time greats and guys that you look up to, even just as a fan of the game. I mean, Kevin Garnett, one of the greatest power forwards of all time, probably my favorite player from that team. You can even look at Ray Allen, right? And it's like those. I mean, that team was so good. Or Rajon Rondo. But shit, I mean, they hold on to that fucking thing more than anything. I mean, even Paul Pierce, he had some crazy duels with players in the playoffs. Now he's terrible in the media. I mean, probably the worst media talent I've seen. I don't know. I mean, Kendrick Perkins is up there. What was that one guy? Played for the Clippers, was sent Ryan Hollins. He's up there as well. I don't think he got fired when ESPN did all those layoffs. So hopefully he's doing well. I mean, he had an NBA career and a national media career, so should be fine money wise. But hopefully he's doing well. He was not good in the media, but best wishes. Um, if Kendrick Perkins followed him right now, I wouldn't necessarily be mad. Regardless, I do think you need some NBA talent in the media, and I do think that it's good to have that different perspective. Maybe players that are a little more higher ranking. Keep getting JJ his stuff. He was a much more coveted role player than Kendrick Perkins, I think, throughout his career. Um, Regardless, though, that was a little bit of a tangent. Yeah, I don't love the comments out of Doc Rivers. He's just it seems like he's all about the media with it, and like, okay, if this is such a hard coaching job for you, why am I seeing an interview every single week about something about it? If this is such a hard coaching job and you haven't been able to get to Milwaukee and you haven't really been able to really build the chemistry with the team, and you're seeing this and that, and like, I can't remember what stat, like something for them to improve. Honestly, I didn't watch a lot of Bucks games and stuff. I literally have just watched them lose games, and I'm like, well, I'm not tuning in for that. I'm not tuning in to just watch Giannis and Dame lose to X team today and X team tomorrow, right? I want to say it's the defense has gotten a little bit better, but the offense is still not great, or vice versa. I don't know. I haven't looked at the advanced back checks on it. Truthfully. But yeah, I just don't love that you're coming out like you're on a losing streak. You're saying how hard it is, but then you're sitting here in the media and just constantly talking about it. Like if it's this hard, why are you on this 2 hour or hour long podcast or whatever your show you're showing up on here? Other than the post game thing, like come on, like if this is that hard, those 2 hours should be spent drawing up plays and working with the players, working with the new staff that you brought in and some of the old staff that you already had to figure out a plan of action for the rest of the season. You're on the All Star break, like you should be busting your ass to make up the time that you did not have before getting hired versus trying to make your next media check. Which has felt like he's been on like a little album run tour. Like oh, he's got an album dropping, so he's gonna go talk about his Sixers days and his Clippers days, and now he's a new coach. Like, what fucking album are we dropping, Doc? I mean, when's the album releasing? Because I ain't seen it unless it's called Losing. It's not out there on the court. Um, God, that was a Celtics rant there. Yeah, I do think the Celtics are my favorite though. Coming out of the East, and right now, the Nuggets, as a defending champions, would still be my favorites. But I do, I fear the Clippers. As a Nuggets fan, in a head-to-head matchup, I fear the Minnesota Timberwolves in a head-to-head matchup as well. I think there's some dark horse potential, for a couple series playoff wins from Golden State, the Lakers, Phoenix. I don't think any of those three teams could win the finals. Of the three, I think Phoenix has the best chance if they really get it together. Just because I think they aren't like some of their stars aren't aging out of it. They've been a little bit more cohesive. They've just been injured, and it's really they haven't seen it click. The other two teams have started to get it to click. They haven't seen it click, and so we haven't really seen what Phoenix can be at its height with this team. Does that mean maybe you see a shakeup come the offseason? Probably not. Bradley Beal still has that no trade clause. Because if you're going to trade somebody, it'd be him, right? You're not just going to, oh, let's ship off Kevin Durant. Oh, let's ship off Devin Booker, a guy that's been on our team for 12 years and helped make us to the finals and drop 70 before dropping 70 was a weekly event, right? I did love his comment on that. I do spread my share bit of D-Book hate, because I'm such a Donovan Mitchell fan, but, I loved his comment. I'm like, "Yeah, I dropped 70 when dropping 70 wasn't a weekly thing." Like, I come on now, I'm one of those guys that can score the basketball, and he absolutely is. Absolutely is. So, we haven't quite seen Phoenix get their full potential. Again, I think Dallas can make a run. I don't necessarily see New Orleans as a team that can make it to the finals. So in my head, it's really a 3.5 man race with Denver, Clippers, and Dallas, due to experience at this point. And I'm sure somebody in the playoffs will surprise me in New Orleans or Minnesota, OKC, one of the older teams at the bottom. Somebody will in the Eastern Conference. And then as for the Western Conference, if it's not Miami surprising or Philly surprising with an MB coming back, seems it's mostly going to be a Milwaukee, New York, and Boston race to the top, with Boston, right now, not even seeing them in their rearview mirror. So, yeah, I think it's been a very interesting season. Let me know what you guys think. Who are you guys seeing as your potential MVP, Rookie of the Year? I know we've kind of spread that stuff about on the podcast, which I'm going to call this a podcast episode essentially. Um, and I'm honestly, I might change up the background stuff. I might not run NBA clips the whole time or whatever. But yeah, I just think it's been a very interesting season to this point, and I'm excited to talk about it for the rest of the season. Again, at this point, if you guys are still listening, appreciate it. Make sure you guys drop a like, subscribe for more. Hopefully, you guys do like the rebrand with the whole game time thing. I didn't really see a lot of feedback initially when I did it. I made a community post about it and saying like I was coming back, and then I didn't post any videos following that, so felt like an ass. So again, appreciate you guys sticking through if you guys are, and have been a viewer of the channel, and hopefully you guys liked the longer form. I did think about potentially doing a podcast on the channel and interjecting that with the regularly kind of scheduled videos, which weren't really necessarily regularly scheduled or currently haven't been regularly scheduled. Regardless, you guys get what I'm saying. So I guess this is a good tester for me on that front of things. And then I'm trying to think what else I kind of had here for the end. So yeah, I mean, if you guys have any thoughts on the rebrand or anything that you guys want to see done to it, I'm open to suggestions. I do like the name, and I think it kind of helped us broaden it so it wasn't so connected to the NBA. Because if I ever do decide that I want to talk some more NFL, I know we talked a little bit about like where the Super Bowl was and stuff like that. It was mostly as a relation to what we were talking about for the NBA. But like I do watch a ton of NFL. I have season tickets. Well, I don't necessarily, but I kind of pseudo-ly have season tickets to go to the Broncos, and so I go to a lot of Broncos games and really enjoy that. And although we've kind of been a terrible team, I feel like I know quite a bit about football. The Avs are a great team in my home state, and so yeah, I mean, I've been to some baseball games. We don't really have a great baseball team here in Colorado. But yeah, I mean, overall, I just love sports. Obviously, basketball being the forefront, upmost, top of the list. It's what I played growing up. It's what I love to watch growing up. It's what I watch now. It's the game that I got done playing. I was sitting there playing 2K before I started recording this. Like, basketball. When you say basketball is life, basketball literally is my life. You could ask anybody I know or anybody that knows me, and they're like, "Yeah, I mean, that's the guy that likes basketball, right? He's got 20 jerseys of X amount of players in his closet that he sits there and saves up money for to spend and buy, and have old school jerseys of like Allen Iverson, and have current Nuggets jerseys and this and that, and you see him with a Nuggets hoodie on everywhere he goes. Like, that's me. I am basketball. That's the sport I love. So I did like initially starting the channel calling it NBA Now. I thought it was cool name to the channel, but I liked broadening it out with the game time thing, giving more option, more personal brand to it. So that's some of the reason I did it. I didn't necessarily give a full explanation on that, and I wanted to add it in here at the end to anybody that cares. As for that, yeah, I think that's the majority of it. Let me know what you guys think, as it relates for awards and everything like that. Um, and yeah, we'll just go with it from there. Do keep a lookout. I think the next couple videos, since we're kind of towards the end here, I'll spoil a little bit. I am gonna have a Luka Doncic video, for MVP coming out here pretty soon. So that will be out. Mavs fans, I'm sure you guys will enjoy that. We'll have a lot of fun jumping into the stats, really looking at team matchups come playoffs where we could see him getting towards the top. I'm thinking about doing that Jason Tatum thing that I kind of hinted at earlier in this episode slash podcast thing that we're doing here. With like, would Jason Tatum be considered an all time great if he wins a championship this year? That would probably be like the intro to it, like a little interjection, right? Like, could he be an all time great? The all time great that never was. I don't know, something like that. And so we might interject and try to do something like that. I could see that being fun. It's a good way to really deep dive and talk about the team that's been the best in the Eastern Conference so far. And then beyond that, I'm sure we'll talk some Lakers, Warriors struggles or something like that. We'll talk some of the top teams. For the most part, we'll cover any team that matters for the rest of the season is my plan. But yeah, I think the Luca video is the one that I want to get out most next. And we'll just go from there. So again, I appreciate you guys watching. And yeah, it's been your boy Dom from Game Time, and I will catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.